How's it going, Goomy Gang? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are doing awesome and having a great day so far. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Haymaker aftermarket part known as the Maglift. It's that aftermarket part that has that small magazine of about 60 shells. Yeah, that thing, we're going to be talking about that. Now, in multiplayer over the last few days, it actually caught a pretty decent nerf. You can go watch Exclusive Zay's video on that. He covered it in one of his videos. Go check that out if you're curious about the more multiplayer side of things. But in today's video, we're going to talk about the Warzone side of things because it actually did transfer over a tiny bit into Warzone, but not all of it, which I'll share with you guys in just a second. As always though, before we get into it directly, I just want to let you guys know, if you want to hop to a certain part of the video, make sure to check the timestamps below in the description. And with all that being said, let's just go ahead and hop into it. So on the multiplayer side of things, what exactly changed? Well, they actually reduced the pellet count from 5 to 4, which is kind of a womp womp moment. They decreased the near medium damage from 20 to 19, so multiply that by 4, that's basically how much damage you're going to do per shot. Then they also decreased the near medium damage range to 6.4 meters. Apparently it was an improper value for that range, so they had to reduce it a little bit, and this is going to help with the lethality of it. In multiplayer, it was a little bit of an issue. I found it was pretty annoying to die to, even at ranges that I thought were a little too forgiving for a shotgun that simple and pretty easy to use. So I'm okay for the most part with this nerf because it's still super good up close, and that's really where it should be. Now for Warzone, the thing that transferred over to Warzone is basically the pellet count. So we basically lost one more pellet, and a lot of people weren't using this thing to begin with because even though it was like crazy with the fire rate, 500 rounds per minute, 60 round shotgun, I mean that's insane, it only has 5 pellets, or it had 5 pellets, and people really felt that. And I saw a lot of people say it was either really good or really garbage. It was really never in between. And now we basically got it even more on the worst side because it's been reduced from 5 pellets to 4. As I was trying to get gameplay for this video, because I like to kind of talk about the gun stats but also how it feels to use, because I think they're both kind of hand in hand very important, I found that it was super inconsistent. It was already kind of inconsistent, but now it's very inconsistent. It just feels like sometimes you're killing people in the blink of an eye, up close usually, and then as soon as you step out like 5 feet or something, it just feels like it could be, I don't know, either like 300 milliseconds or it's going to take a whole second to down someone. It just feels all over the place. And yes, this is even with a really, really tight spread. I have a tac stance build where basically the reticle is like overlapping with each other, all the lines of the reticle, and it's super tight, but when you start firing, it does open up a little bit. It's still pretty tight, but now since you only have 4 pellets, you're going to notice this thing is just very inconsistent. Now, is it still usable? Absolutely. As you'll see in the gameplay, I can still shred some people. There are some instances where they just don't really know what to do, and it just kind of murders them in the blink of an eye. But what you're seeing is generally like highlights where I actually tend to get kills for the most part. Occasionally you'll see like deaths where it shows off maybe a death that was like, how did that even happen? And that happens quite a bit with this build. Even though it's super strong, unless you're like point blank, like very, very, very close to someone, that pellet count is just really going to screw you over. But again, it's just kind of wildly inconsistent because sometimes even when they were like 6 or 7 or 8 meters out, they were still getting down like super quick. And I think that has more to do with the fact that the pellets were kind of spreading in my favor. Since pellets generally have a random spread, I think that was just, it was more in my favor, but also I was hitting my shots well. But you'll notice at times it just is very inconsistent. Now the big question here is this thing the best way to run the Haymaker? Because on paper you would feel like it is, but that pellet count really doesn't help it, because if you look at the damage values and range and time to kill and all that for this thing, I'll flash it up on the screen here, you can see this thing is actually pretty devastating. Like the fact it can go so far out and have that kind of potential for a time to kill is absurd for a shotgun that fires this fast and just puts lead downstream like nobody's business. But that's super impractical because of course that's really far. You're gonna have a wider pellet spread the further you get, and also you only have 4 pellets. So the reason that nobody used the riveter was 4 pellets. Now it's the same thing with this particular niche build of the Haymaker. So I would say that this thing isn't the most competitive way to run it. It's definitely better than the base ammo, I would say, but it's not better than Dragon's Breath. If you want the most sort of competitive, if you want to call it that, or meta class for the Haymaker, you definitely want to use something like the big barrel, the Dragon's Breath ammo, of course, a 20 round drum mag, no stock, and maybe even the Crown Breaker chokes. You get a nice tight spread. And of course, you're going to have 8 pellets. And that, when you go from a gun using only 4 or maybe 5 or 3 or whatever pellets, and then you go back to a shotgun that has 8, it's going to feel like a god tier shotgun because it's so much more consistent. And it's the same thing with the Haymaker. Honestly, the Maglift is fun, it's cool, but it serves its purpose as more of a niche. Like, yeah, there's still a lot of potential. It can still be really annoying to die to. It can still be incredibly strong, but it's not the most ideal way for most people to run it. I'd say if you're a higher skilled player, it can be kind of fun, but for people who are a little bit more on the lower tier of the skill rating, then I would say maybe just stick with Dragon's Breath, because that's going to be easier overall and sort of the more, again, like I said, meta option of the two. And yeah, just to be clear, like I said, the only thing that transferred from multiplayer is the pellet count, not the damage range nerfs or anything like that. It's still the same thing it has been for the past few months. It's still the same, except that now we only have 4 pellets as opposed to 5. So that's pretty much all I got to tell you guys about the Maglift attachment. It's fun, it's niche, but it's not the most competitive option for this shotgun, and I would say Dragon's Breath is probably the way to go for most people because it's a little bit easier and a lot more consistent. So now, as always, I want to know down below in the comments, what is everyone's thoughts on this attachment? Do you guys like to use this thing? Do you find that it's actually incredibly strong and maybe not as weak as I let it on to be, or it's a little bit more consistent than I say it is? Or do you prefer to use something like Dragon's Breath, or maybe even the base ammo for this gun? And with all that being said, guys, I will see you in the next video.